sunshine. I realize I am in sunshine. The skies are turning blue. Would you like to go to the top of sunshine?
Well, welcome to another video of Accept Truth with Joy. And in this interview, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Jamie Jensen from BYU. Really excited to have her with me. And Jamie, so thanks for coming on Accept Truth with Joy.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I wanted to start off with just having you kind of give us a little rundown of who you are. Just introduce yourself, both kind of from maybe a little bit, what was your personal upbringing, and then we'll come up to speed on what you're doing professionally as well.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So like he said, I'm Dr. Jamie Jensen. I'm an associate professor at Brigham Young University currently. I grew up in Arizona. Let's see, my family, I grew up in the church. My mom is a convert in college. My dad kind of grew up in the sticks and didn't have a whole lot of church influence. So we were a little bit of a different family growing up as far as the church goes. And we always attended, but like I didn't know any of the stories from the scriptures till I got to seminary. And it was like, wait, what? Who cut off whose arms? Like I didn't know any of these kinds of things. And so, but I've always been interested in science. And so I studied, let's see, I did an undergraduate degree in animal science at BYU. I was planning on being a vet, and then I was planning on being a doctor, and then I was planning on being a PA, and I just bounced all over the place. I ended up in a master's program at BYU after taking a year at home in Arizona, getting married. I did a master's in molecular evolution, developmental biology here at BYU.
That's where we first met, I believe.
That's where I met you.
You were doing your master's and I was doing my PhD.
Yes, that's been a long time. Yes, because Keone Kawe and I shared a little cubicle in Paul Evans' lab. And then from there, I went to Arizona State University. So back home, my husband was from there. So we went back there. I did a PhD there. I started in developmental biology, looking at heart development. But then I got interested in this education stuff. So I switched over. I stayed in biology, but I found an advisor, Anton Lawson, who's real famous in science education. And so I did my PhD work mostly in education, took a lot of educational psychology classes. So I got recruited to BYU in 2010 as a DBER, so a discipline-based education researcher. So we're kind of like the education researchers, but we have a disciplinary background. So we're much more focused on disciplinary questions. So I focus specifically on evolution and religion.
So when did you start at BYU? What was your?
2010.
2010. So you're 11 years now in.
Yeah.
So how's it been at BYU for you?
I love it for the most part. COVID has kind of been awful, but but I really like it. It's been the perfect job for me to be able to tackle the issues that I tackle.
Yeah.
I think it would have been harder to do at another institution, at least to get my foot in the door and get started. So yeah, I've been really grateful for that.
Awesome. And then your family, you're married, you have children?
Yes, I have 4 kids, all boys. My oldest is 17 and just putting in his mission papers. And then I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old.
Yeah, we kind of overlap. I've got my second oldest is just putting in her mission papers right now too. So I kind of have about that same age group.
Nerve-wracking.
And you've always been a member of the church, always been active.
I've always been a member.
Recommend holding everything, right?
Yep, always been active. My grandfather, who's my mother's father, he was always my influencer. He's a nuclear physicist and was always into science. And so he would always pull me aside as a little kid and grill me on science stuff, and always was pushing me to kind of break outside this stereotypical realm of the church. I think he loves it. He's not a member, and I think he loves the church in the morals and values and things that it brings. But he was always telling me, "You're not just going to be a mom. You're going to go on." And I think that was a big influence for me to just keep going to see where it went. But it turns out I am a mom and a professional, and it's worked out just fine. So
good. Well, maybe we can come back to talking a little bit about how you balance, your life, because I know that's difficult.
What's balance? I don't think that exists.
So maybe we can come back to that. I'd like to start off though. The real reason well, there's a few reasons I wanted to talk to you. One of the main reasons, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but BYU is one of the leaders in this reconciling evolution effort that's taking nationwide. Could you introduce a little bit what that reconciling evolution, or Rico Evo that you sometimes call it, is?
Yeah, Rico Evo. Yeah, so it's kind of in contrast to some of the other models that have been out there. And so when I try to explain it, I usually start with, oftentimes we see a deficit model being the approach. So a scientist might assume that their students don't accept evolution because they're deficient in some way. Often they think it's a deficiency in just knowledge about evolution, but the literature shows, that relationship between knowledge and acceptance is somewhat tenuous. And I think it has a lot to do with religiosity, which we can talk about. So that's the deficit model, but a lot of times it can be offensive, right? Because sometimes they're assuming you're lacking in like scientific reasoning or IQ or things like that. And then the other model I've seen often, the one that I saw in undergraduate and graduate school, was the resolution model. So we're gonna show you all the facts, and we're gonna show you why your creationist ideas are wrong. And hopefully you'll resolve to the science over the religion, still pitting them as a false dichotomy. And so our reconciliation, it's not new in that there have been a lot of approaches to this that are trying to bring religion and make religion okay. But really we're saying total reconciliation, meaning that we can hold religion and we can hold science, and it's not non-overlapping magisteria, right? Like Stephen Gould would say, it's more, let's see where they can connect. Where can they come together? What things can I hold here? What things can I hold here? And where can they come together? So that's kind of what we've been doing. We've been doing it in the classroom though. And I say we, I mean the legends at BYU, Dwayne Jeffrey, Bill Bradshaw, they've been doing it for decades. We're now just gathering the data and saying, look, this really works. It's a unique approach.
Yeah.
It works well.
And I'll link in the description to the Reconciling Evolution website that's part of the BYU biology department there, so that people can see all the resources. And so please go take a look at this website. It is fantastic. It's got a ton of great resources for both, I guess, general, just anyone, but also teachers, right?
Yes, it's geared towards undergraduate educators, but we're also, hopefully soon, we will get our secondary ed class put up there that we created in Canvas. So it's geared towards educators, but also just anyone interested. And it's got sort of an LDS slant in that there's a lot of resources that are very specific for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But a lot of the content has been created by all different religions from across the country that we had attend a workshop. And so there are things on there for Catholics, Protestants, Presbyterians, and on. Yeah.
And you're funded to do this work, right? Yeah. Who are you funded through?
So Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Their science education board is what funds it.
And it's you, and there's I don't know how many other main PIs are on this.
So grant. Dr. Seth Bybee, who's here at BYU, Professor Josh Stowers, who's here at BYU and does the secondary ed. And then we have two collaborators from Point Loma Nazarene University, so Mark Mann and April Cordero. And then we have Carl Giberson, who is at Stonehill College. And then Lee, why is his name escaping me? Oh my goodness. Good old Lee from University of Alabama. Lee Meadows, wow.
Meadows.
I was thinking of another collaborator. I'm like, nope, that's not it. Anyway, Lee Meadows from the University of Alabama. So we're kind of all over the place.
And different religious traditions as well.
Yeah, Nazarene, Catholic. Lee grew up
Young Earth creationist.
Evangelical.
Right? Yeah.
The Young Earth creationist, and has since sort of, I think he's Presbyterian now, but I could be misquoting that.
Yeah, so it's really, and I participated in a couple of the events that you've done, a workshop and online thing, and just really impressed with the thoughtfulness of everyone that was there. It was
so fantastic.
I mean, I felt the Spirit of God, as we're there trying to figure this stuff out. It was so awesome. And I realized once again that Mormonism does not have a monopoly on knowledge, and it doesn't have a monopoly on spirituality, and it doesn't have a monopoly on godliness. Yeah. So thank you for letting me be part of that. I've so much enjoyed doing that.
Well, we really appreciate your help.
Well, whenever you need anything, I love doing that. And what are the plans going forward with this Reconciling Evolution project that you have?
Yeah. So like I said, we just finished our well, it's technically our second secondary ed outreach event. And so we did that one. We now have a Canvas course. It's meant for high school and junior high science teachers and then religious educators of the youth. So youth pastors, seminary teachers. And so we just finished the first one of that. We plan to do a couple more. We have funding to do a couple more of those in different regions of the country. Excuse me. And then we are running a third RICO Evo workshop for undergraduate educators. Right now it is planned to go digital because of COVID, but I've been really stewing over it. I feel like the face-to-face experience that the other teams had, and I've been interviewing past team members, has been vital to the experience. And so we may actually consider bumping it a month or two and doing it later in the summer and doing it in person. But that's where we bring teams from universities. So they have to have a biologist on the team, a theologian on the team. So someone who approaches religion from sort of a academic standpoint. And then we have a local pastor or preacher or minister. So kind of a boots on the ground approach to religion. And they come as a team of three, and we discuss ways in which their faith traditions or the faith traditions of their students can reconcile with evolutionary theory. And then they create classroom lesson plans, which is what's on the website. And then we also do, if they're willing, a video where the three of them sit down and just hash it out and talk about how they bring it together. So those are all available to view. So a student from anywhere in the country can say, you know, I really identify most with like Presbyterianism. So they could go onto our website and they are labeled by general denomination, and they can watch people of their faith talk about how they reconcile evolution and religion.
So reconciling is not just something of the Mormon tradition, of the LDS tradition.
No.
I mean, this is, but what problems have you seen in common? Like, what are some of the main issues that everyone's dealing with? And then maybe, you know, what are some of the solutions that you found that are either really easy or some that take a little bit more work?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the biggest issues we see with all religions is it's a hermeneutic problem. Since I've learned these new words as I've done this research, but it's a biblical interpretation problem. Not understanding the genres of the Bible, not understanding the climate that was going on at the time that these biblical writers were writing, not understanding the purpose of some of these texts, and part of that, especially in our religion, and I'm not bashing on our religion because obviously I'm a true believer, but our religion is a, you know, every member can be a leader and a teacher, and there's no training. And I love that about our church, but at the same time, none of us, including me, have ever really been trained on biblical interpretation, on ancient Hebrew, on all of these things that other religions actually do train their people on. And they know so much more. I've actually been humbled so many times talking to other religions where they're like, oh, you didn't learn this when you were 5? Like, no, I did not. And so I think we're working on getting that educational material out there, just how to interpret Genesis, what are the genres of the Bible. We've been using a lot from the Bible Project, which is a really cool website that's not our church, but it's awesome. So that's one of the big problems we see, and a lot of the conflict comes from a misinterpretation of Genesis, or the Pearl of Great Price, Moses, Abraham, same issue, right? That we're misinterpreting, more literalist than we should be, maybe. The other big issue, obviously, is organismal speciation, macroevolution, and human evolution. Those are a little harder, right? But I think, you know, and I emphasize this all the time, that our goal is not to change your mind, right? Our goal is just to offer you potential bridges. If this is a struggle for you, we'd rather you keep your faith, right? And so if I can offer you ways that this can fit, so the science isn't so scary or is so threatening, that's kind of what we're going for. And those are kind of common across all the religions we've encountered. Now, we focus mostly on Judeo-Christian religions. We're trying to expand a little bit into Muslim, but we haven't created any materials yet. All of our materials are very Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
So
you've been at this now for a while. Have you gotten any pushback from the university or colleagues or in the general public, in your ward, or?
Yeah, so not from my department. right? I think everybody in my department is really on the same page, not from my college. Interestingly, our Dean Porter, is an awesome individual, and he's not fully convinced. I mean, he's still working through the reconciliation process, but he is a staunch supporter of our efforts to do what we're doing. And I love that about him. And he's very honest about it. Even up at the university level. So President Worthen actually came and gave the welcome address at our first workshop. He's very much on board. Razband has been on board. And so, but then we get resistance. We've gotten some resistance from CES. The church education system has been, it depends. The seminary teachers love it. They've been to several of our events, but some of the CS folks have been a little more hesitant. The religion department, I've got lots of colleagues over there that are awesome and pro, but then we get a little bit of resistance from other colleagues there. We get resistance from the public, like when the Bean Museum put up the evolution exhibit, and we actually held our conference there and kind of surrounded this evolution exhibit. And we sometimes get resistance there. It's funny because I actually don't see most of the comments because they either come to President Worthen or they come to Dean Porter, and they just take care of it. Like I only hear about it when they'll accidentally say it out loud that, oh, I had to write 3 letters on your behalf. And I think, wait, what? So I don't always hear them. But interestingly, I have gotten resistance on the science side as well, right? So we published a paper, Seth Bybee and I published a paper a few years ago. We actually looked at the scientific reasoning ability of people all across the country of different religious denominations. And then we looked at their acceptance of evolutionary theory, because the deficit model would claim that you're dumb if you don't accept evolution, is kind of the idea. And I was out to show that that's not the case. And so we gathered all these data about scientific reasoning, and we found that there's absolutely no correlation between your scientific reasoning ability and your religiosity, and your scientific reasoning ability and your acceptance of evolution. Meaning that you can have really high scientific reasoning and completely reject evolution on entirely different grounds, right? Or you can have, even more scary, really low scientific reasoning ability and totally accept evolution and push it.
And this is the man-wearing paper, right?
No, this is, so yes, Katie was on it, but it's I can't remember.
Well, I'll talk to you later, and I'll make sure to link to that in the discussion as well.
But interestingly, when that got published, I actually got scathing letters, emails from both sides, right? Because the science side, they were really unhappy. People were really unhappy with what I showed, right? It didn't fit the dialogue. So Seth and I actually struggled to get it even past an editor into review, because the editor would look at the title and go, nope. And so it took us a little bit to get it into review. Once the reviewers saw, I mean, the science was sound, right? But then on the other side, we got people who I thought I was like justifying, saying, look, it's not a dumb thing. You're not dumb, but just scathing. How dare you think about my intelligence? And I think, I can't please.
That's fascinating.
I can't please either side.
And it's funny because it's like this time right now, it's like we tend to hear only voices from the extremes, where there's this huge space in the middle that's more moderate, and it, studies like yours, I hope that we hear more of those kinds of things too, because I like hearing about, what can both sides contribute to the conversation, right? So I think that's important.
Well, and that study came out right after a study by Mead that came out in, I think, Nature, saying basically that the students who didn't accept evolution were dumb. That was their narrative. But if you look at the research, it was terribly flawed. And actually a group of us, Jason Wiles and his postdoc student, Ryan Dunk, we actually put out a letter, and it went into Nature as a rebuttal to that paper, saying, look, the science is not sound. Were you on that paper?
No.
There was a huge long list of authors.
Now, could you talk a little bit about another research that came out of your lab that I thought was fascinating as well? And it actually relied on Dr. Bradshaw's work for dozens and dozens of years. Who knows how many years? I mean, I was there. I remember him doing these night talks that he would do, and I've kind of replicated that here at UVU a little bit, but he would gather data as well. Can you explain a little bit about how that, what was the data, how you guys came up with it, and then what that was like to get that published, and then the conclusions from that?
Yeah, so that's our Bradshaw article. Yeah, so Bill Bradshaw I guess, had been asking his students. So he used to give his students in his Bio 100 classes, he'd give them an essay at the beginning of the semester, asking them to just talk about what they thought about evolution and what resistance they felt and where they learned what they learned. And then he'd give them the essay again at the end. And then he gave them a couple questionnaires, one on ecology and environmental issues, and one on other scientific issues like biotechnology and things like that. And he'd been doing this for 30 years or something. And he retired. Well, I was sitting in my office one day, he knocks on my door, and I mean, he's like this legend, right? That I took classes from when I was an undergraduate. And he says, "Hey, I've got these data from 30 years ago. Would this be of interest to you?" And I mean, I literally was salivating. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, this will be interesting. And so we basically reran the same study. And there's, you know, there's issues maybe with instrumentality and those kinds of things, but we had to keep it the same as what had been done 30 years ago. And so we ran the essays again. It was in 2014, I believe. We ran the essays again, pre and post. And we ran those two same surveys again, but then we added some additional things to try to get at what, if there were changes, what maybe were causing the changes. And so, you know, he had upwards of almost 2,000 responses from 20 to 30 years ago. And then we gathered another 800 or 900 responses from now. And we compared evolution acceptance and what these influences were in these surveys, and found some really interesting things. First of all, there's been a huge jump in evolution acceptance over those decades. And interestingly, when we looked, about 70% of our respondents were, their parents were alumni. So their parents likely took Bill Bradshaw's class, or those that were teaching the Bio 100s at the time. And then we had their children in our cohort. And so you see from beginning to end of the semester where Bill Bradshaw took them, our students start where they end, and then make an additional jump up from there. And so it's like been a team effort that they've taken them so far.
Well, like 30 years ago, it was maybe in the teens acceptance, essentially.
At the beginning of the semester, yeah, and they ended in the 30s to 40s, and then we start them in the 30s to 40s and take them up to the 80s.
Yeah, that's that I've been doing a lot of this research here at UVU too for the past 12 years. And that's when I started here, it was also about 30 to 40% acceptance. And then at the end of the semester, much higher. And now, 10 years later, I've got a study that I'm doing right now too. And it looks like we're going to be probably now almost 50%. We're getting closer and closer to kind of a 50% acceptance now with incoming freshmen. Yeah.
And
is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah. Our students, I would say if you leave out, if it's just organismal evolution, we're at 60 to 70%, maybe even higher. If you add in humans, we're still hitting the 50, 60%.
That's awesome. So there has been a change.
There has been a change. And so we looked at several factors. We looked at whether it was being brought up in high school and covered in high school. They're getting better coverage in high school of evolution. They're getting less negative statements from seminary teachers, from general authorities at conference, whatever. They're getting less of those negative statements by church leaders. That their trusting of science and nature of science hasn't really changed, but their feelings of conflict have gone down quite a bit. So we think, it's just becoming a little bit less of a taboo subject, I think, in our culture. And that's been helpful. Plus, we've got all these role models, which is what your research shows, right?
Right.
We're getting a lot more of these role models that are saying, hey, it's not a conflict. We can work this out.
Yeah. I mean, for me, definitely coming back from my mission, I was a young earth creationist, but for me, it was role models like Dwayne Jeffrey and others who I'm like, they just would say, look, evolution is the best explanation that we have. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, that they're, faithful Latter-day Saints. And so all of a sudden I had to deal with that, so do you see the same thing happening at BYU now too, because now there's not just 1 or 2 or 3 evolutionary biologists, there's 20 or 25 evolutionary biologists, and most biologists, I would say almost all of them, probably accept evolution.
A lot of them, yeah.
I mean, there may be a few here and there, but I would say,
yeah.
But I'd say most do. But what's fascinating, and I don't think people realize this, there's probably 15 to 20 faculty that would call themselves in one way or another an evolutionary biologist at BYU.
Yeah, our whole department, right? That's all we
Yeah.
do is evolution and ecology. So yeah.
So do you see students then kind of that being a big influence for them when they get to BYU and it's kind of like they can
Yeah,
breathe? And
it's interesting because I mean, the majority of my experiences have been very positive with students that they are so, the biggest response I get from students actually, and see, I'm getting them in Bio 100, right? So that's the non-majors. They're not getting to know all these professors that accept evolution.
that's true.
Amongst the majors and the upperclassmen, we do see that a lot more. With my students, the overwhelming response I get is, oh, phew. Like, I didn't realize this was okay. The science, I've learned it in high school. It's so convincing. I feel so conflicted. And then when we walk in and do our reconciliation lesson and say, hey, it's okay. It's huge relief is what I see usually, is that, oh, there's a way that this goes together. Oh my goodness, that makes me so happy. And I have lots of students that come to my office individually and want to talk about details, like where do Adam and Eve fit in, and which obviously we don't have an answer for. But we talk about details. But I am seeing with increasing frequency, which is bothersome, and it's low, but like I personally have seen 3 in the last few months. And I know there's others because they're not talking to me. They're not all talking to me, right? But students who have come into my office and it's the exact opposite. They like the science, they've accepted the evolution, and they feel like they've been deceived by their religion. And they are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's, well, if they deceive me about this, then it all must be a lie. And so I've had 3 students in my office in a crisis of faith saying, why was I taught all this young earth stuff growing up? And why did my seminary teacher say, or why did, and the science is so sound, and they're frustrated. And in fact, I have an email that is an actual quote from a student that she said, I just feel deceived. Wow. On the religious side. And so that's a little concerning, because I think that, they're getting exposed to the science so much earlier, and it's not like, they've got these handheld devices. They can get to the science easy, and it's very abundant and it's very convincing. And so they're already feeling like, I don't understand it. I'd rather just toss the faith. And that makes me really sad.
Wow. That kind of parallels a lot of narratives that are going on right now too, with just history of the church, the history of the church, where a lot of people feel deceived because they now are learning other things. What would you suggest then? What would you say to someone who is, I don't know, a Sunday school teacher or a seminary teacher or a parent or an uncle or an aunt who's really adamant about reading all of the anti-evolution, anti-science quotes and giving them to their nephews and giving them to their children, giving them to their students, and setting them up for this crushing feeling of being deceived? What advice would you give to those? How would you talk to them? What would you say to them?
I would say, like, first of all, I would say I completely understand. I understand what you're trying to do. And I respect that you're trying to save your children's testimony. Like, first and foremost, and that's, I always laugh and say, to my funders, I say I'm trying to increase evolution acceptance. To my close friends, I say I'm actually trying to save testimonies. That's the whole reason I do what I do. But I understand, because I've met people like this, and the kids are leaving the church, the science is driving them away from the church. And so their solution is to shun the science or knock the science or weaken the science, and in the name of saving testimonies. And I think, unfortunately, that I'm seeing it personally, that's backfiring, right? If you want to save their testimonies, you need to help them figure out ways in which it's compatible. Now, certainly not all things that are coming out of academia and the way the world is going with all these other weird social issues. We definitely don't want to say, well, let's just jump on the bandwagon of wherever the world's going and make it easy for our kids by accepting it. So that's not what I'm saying, right? But as far as evolution goes, the science is sound. There's no political agenda. There's no social agenda. It's just pure data, right? And so in that case, I don't think trying to get your kids to ignore it or shun it is a good idea, because they're going to see it. They're going to get exposed to it, and it is very sound. right? It's very, very supported is the right word, right? There's a plethora of evidence. And so for that, I would say, help your kids embrace it. Help your kids embrace it in a faith-friendly way. And that's what we're trying to do with the reconciliation.
So how do you, what do you say though, when they're like, but these prophets said that this was wrong and evil? I mean, what's your response when they kind of go down that pathway?
So I'd ask them to first go and evaluate their sources. Were these prophets or were these not prophets? And most of they've been general authorities. And also look at, there's a great article that I actually pass out, and it's on my site too, of how church doctrine is established, right? And if one person says it, that does not make it doctrine, unless it's the prophet, right? But there's ways that doctrine is established, and a lot of the debates that were going on, a lot of the literature that, or the quotes from general authorities like Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie, that people like to quote are, they were said a long, long time ago. They were said with the perspective, the scientific perspective they had at the time, which was very different from what the scientific perspective is now. And so, I can totally understand why some of these people spoke out the way that they did, because the knowledge was limited at that time. And so I think people need to realize where it was coming from. What was the purpose of saying these things? Was it, really to say evolution the church is against evolution? Well, no, we know the church's stance is neutral. So maybe he had some other issues.
How do we know that? How do we know the church's stance is neutral?
Good question. So we have the 1925 statement is the latest, 1925, right? This is a long time ago. That's the latest official statement from the first presidency on evolution. And it's just neutral, right? It doesn't say whether it's kind of leave that to science, right? And then we do have more current, there's an Encyclopedia of Mormonism, it's a little more current, but the most current is the New Era. And honestly, I don't know where that fits actually, as far as doctrine.
Because we don't know who wrote that.
We don't know who wrote that, but that came out in 2016. And that clearly states that we're neutral. And those are the only official type statements. And so everything else is just, and this is something else that people need to understand, is that these are people. Right? We have this tendency in our church to elevate any general authority to sainthood. Like they can't, none of their personal opinions ever come through, and that's not true, right? We have personal opinions. We're still flawed individuals. We still, may think one thing, but it's not necessarily doctrine. And so I think having a healthy understanding and humility for who these people are and what they're working with when they're making these statements is important.
So is your experience then that you've kind of shared with students coming to you and, trying to work their way through their testimonies and work their way through the science, is that common among the rest of the faculty there at BYU?
I think so. I think we all deal with it.
Yeah. And I sometimes pose this to people too, maybe you can respond to this. If evolution were false and were an evil idea and really was leading us down a pathway that got us away from God, if that were all true, would BYU look different and do things differently and teach things differently? You know where I'm going with this kind of this leading question?
No. So if the prophet came out and said evolution is wrong.
Yeah. Or if that were our history, if our history were, instead of being neutral, our history was, we're going to go down the Joseph Fielding Smith position of it's evil. Would there be that many? What would your department look like? And what would you be able to teach?
Our department probably would not exist. I just can't imagine a world in which the church would just flat out reject science.
Sure. And so you teach evolution at BYU.
Yes.
A lot of people watching this may not even know this. Is it required for the majors?
Yes. Yeah.
And is it threaded throughout all of the other courses, perhaps?
Yes. Evolution is the foundation of biology. They get it in every class. Okay.
And is it taught essentially the same at BYU that you would teach it at any other serious university, perhaps with the exception of you have your reconciling day and you hand out the BYU Evolution?
So we get to bring in the gospel, which is fantastic. But all the principles, all the mechanisms of evolution, all the evidences of it's all taught to the standard that is worthy of accreditation as a university.
Yeah. Because I think some people have this idea that BYU doesn't agree with evolution. And even if they do, or even if they teach it, it's just kind of like, well, we got to teach you this, but we really don't accept it or believe in it.
Oh gosh, no. Yeah, we teach it, and we've got a whole hominid skull collection being built down on the second floor. Like, we teach the latest evidence that we have.
Right.
Yeah. But with the beauty of being able to bring in gospel perspectives where they fit.
So tell me some of these gospel perspectives that you think make evolution beautiful, or that supports evolution, or vice versa. What things in evolution do you think make the gospel perspective beautiful?
So there's a couple of things that I shared. Now, this is just the way that I
this is
it, right? Not church doctrine or anything, but one of the videos that I show my students when I do the reconciliation is the Smoothini, the ghetto Houdini. So it's this magician that was on America's Got Talent, and he's phenomenal, right? So I show him this little clip. I mean, he's stuffing pens up his nose and he's making liquid appear out of thin air, and it's really cool. And I tell him, gosh, when I watched that, the only thing I could think of was that he has true magical powers. There's no other way to explain what he is doing. He is magic. And then I thought about it more and thought, well, he's not. So there's an explanation for how he's doing this, and I could potentially learn how he's doing this. And so I look at the creation the same way. Is it possible that God poofed everything into existence? Yeah. But what's cooler to me is that he didn't, right? And that he used scientific means to do this. And even cooler, I can find out. And that's the study of biology. So I always liken the study of biology to the study of magic.
I love that. I can find out.
I can find out. And so for me, it's beautiful. And then, this is another thing that I think about a lot. And obviously, again, this is just my opinion, but there's that scripture that talks about the natural man, right? Our whole goal here on earth is to overcome the natural man and build those characteristics in our personality that make us more godlike. And honestly, being a parent has made this so profound to me, because with my kids, especially with the school system these days, there's like no consequences for anything, right? Like they don't have to turn anything in on time. They can retake every test, which becomes a problem when my freshmen come in and they can't do that. But anyway, so I find myself making artificial consequences for them, setting up scenarios in my own home that are going to teach them skills that I know they need, that they're not getting taught in the school system, like how to be responsible. So if they don't turn it in on time, they may not get in trouble at school, but they do get in trouble in my house. And they sit at the table, they're grounded to the table until everything is done, right? So I create circumstances in which my children will learn what I feel like they need to learn. And so it's like this small glimpse into what God was thinking and saying, okay, I'm going to send my children down for this mortal experience. I need them to learn certain skills. So I need to set up a scenario that's going to teach them those skills. And so, gosh, if I were doing it and I wanted to create a mortal body that was going to challenge my spirit children to overcome selfishness, to be charitable, right? A body created through evolution is fantastic. Like, it is selfish. That's what governs, right? Survival of the selfish. That's right. The survival of the one that cares about themselves and their genes, right? And so I think, and I look at my children too, and these natural tendencies that they have, their first word is mine, right? And they are selfish and ungoverned, but that's their body. Their body is the same as any other organism on earth that's fighting for survival. And so for me, I think, wow, that was brilliant. To create our bodies through evolution creates the perfect vessel to test our spirits and teach us humility and selflessness and charity.
Excellent.
So that's kind of how that's how
those are great insights. Those are the kinds of things I think that if we talk more that way, I think will allow people a space to find still a creative, divine plan, even in the midst of a natural process that has lots of randomness and non-randomness associated with it, right? Because a lot of people don't like, or at least they feel threatened, I think, by the idea that evolution is, and they always think it's just random. It's not just random, but there is a certain amount of randomness to evolution. And I think that randomness sometimes causes people to wonder, well, what's God's role in this whole thing if there's randomness? Have you ever tried to deal with that?
Absolutely. Because you're right. Like, the mutations that create variation are random, right? But the variation that survives is far from random, because the environment will dictate which variants are plausible and which variants are not plausible. And so it's not random in that sense. But even that, you can step back and say, well, where's God involved? Well, and I would say, well, does he need to be involved in that part of it? Couldn't he have set it up? Like, he knows what he's doing. This is a great process. It works. I'm going to set it up. And I often talk to students about different models of theistic evolution. So theistic evolution is the idea that God created through evolution, right? And so I call it the dominoes model or the tinkering model. And either one I'm fine with, right? But the dominoes model is the idea that God knew exactly what was going to happen because he understands the scientific processes far better than we do. And so he set it up exactly how it needed to be. And maybe the individual details of, like, the monarch butterfly didn't really matter that much. But the whole point, the land, the organisms, a place for us, our spirits to dwell, to have this experience mattered. And he pushed go, and it went the way that it needed to go. So that's the dominoes model. The tinkering model is that same thing. He understands the processes, he got it started, but then he's constantly tinkering, like changing the environment here to select for this, changing the environment here to select for this, and directing it as he goes. And I'm fine with either. Neither one contradicts the scientific evidence, because there's no evidence either way for that. I tend to favor the domino model. I think God is that great that he could do that and make it happen the way he needed it to happen. But yeah, so it's not random in that the process was carefully designed from the beginning, and the outcome was known. But the process itself may seem random to us in our tiny little spheres of understanding that we have.
That was great. I like that. I hadn't heard those two. I mean, I've talked about tinkering, but I've never heard the domino versus tinkering model there like that. And so it doesn't make sense for you, the model of a magic wand God who has to do every single little thing then.
Right. I don't know why he would need to do that. He's smart enough to figure out how to do it with what he's working with. And I think he's got to work
he and she, right? Both of them were there doing it.
Both of them. Yes, for sure.
You recently gave a talk at BYU. What was it? It
was a devotional.
A devotional. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I watched it. I've watched it actually a couple times.
Oh.
And of course, all of it, some of it was like, man, I say that exact same thing, or I mean, so a lot of things that were, I mean, I was right on with you. What did you get any feedback from that after you gave this talk? I'm going to link to that talk as well.
I did. I've gotten tons of feedback on it. I think, surprisingly, it has been, I think, really helpful for a lot of people. I've gotten a lot of parents who have said, oh, my son or my daughter is struggling with this, and this talk was perfect to just help them. And the talk itself is about science and religion. So it's not necessarily evolution focused, but it's just science and religion as two ways of knowing that integrate really well with each other. And I talked about the differences between them and the differences in the evidence. And it's stuff that, like I said, I mean, it's not mine. It's things that I've learned over the years that have helped me have absolutely no issue with anything that comes up in science. You know, knowing how to handle it and treat it and think about it is really important. And so, yeah, I've gotten, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of emails.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I already have it on my Accept Truth with Joy channel. It's there's a playlist there of other videos, and it's already there. So maybe people have seen it, but I'll link to it for sure. Did you get pushback? Did you get any negative feedback from that?
I've gotten none so far.
Nothing sent to you, at least.
Nothing sent to me. Right. And I wrote a lot of it in this article that's going to be coming out soon, and that you had reviewed. And there's actually a few things in there where I thought it has expanded my understanding of even what I said.
Yeah. So this is there's a BYU Studies
Mhm.
What maybe you can talk about that
The
real quick. I don't
BYU
know if you
studies
can or
quarterly
not.
issue. Well, so it's kind of still like on the DL.
Okay.
So I mean, they did send out a solicitation.
Right.
So I know people know about it, but I don't know when it's going to be published. I don't know. Yeah, but it's one of their quarterly issues, and we're just going to talk about evolution and our church.
Right. Yeah.
And we
I
solicited
submitted
articles.
an article to that, and we'll see.
Yeah,
if it's accepted. Yeah.
yeah, fantastic. Yeah, all of them. We've got so many great things that hopefully, but it's still in the process of editing and getting reviews and things like
that. So one thing that I know that we've talked about, and a lot of us have wondered, what is your position on whether the church should do an LDS essay on evolution? One of these.
I would.
What you think they should?
I think
Why?
they should. Mostly it's because, and where did I just read this? We were talking about, I think it was Ben Spackman actually, who's got some great stuff on this. And we were talking about the history of the church and just the ways in which membership moves in one direction or another. And we are totally a top-down church, which actually is interesting. At these conferences that we've held 2 so far, people are astounded at how our church moves in one body. Like that just doesn't happen. And the Catholic Church accepting, that does not happen in most churches where one person says it from the top and it just, it immediately trickles down and we are standing in solidarity. And it's fantastic. And I'm so happy to be a part of a church that is like that. And so as a consequence, though, I think, these grassroots efforts like what I'm doing and what Seth's doing and what you're doing are helpful in helping church membership. But I do think the best solution is going to be a more top-down approach to this.
So, I agree with you. I wish they would do it too. But I've also thought, well, but they don't have to do an LDS essay on gravity.
No, I know.
Or on meiosis. Right? Like, so why? So why evolution? Coming back to you. So then why evolution? Why is evolution different than other main theories, laws, principles of science or biology? Why?
Yeah, I think it's mostly just because evolution and the majority of our church membership accepts microevolution nearly 100%. Like the gradual changes in organisms over time due to their environment. I don't think many people have a problem with that.
Maybe, although I don't think people have really thought about it.
They probably do.
I don't think people really thought about what is change, what is a species, when does one species become
that's true.
Species. I just posted 3 videos on this, and I just don't think people think really about.
If you accept microevolution, you should accept macro since it's the same.
Right. Thing, exactly. So
yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
So there's small parts of evolution that I think people don't have a problem with, but I think the reason evolution is such a tricky subject is that it directly touches on some religious doctrine that's been misinterpreted over time. And it directly confronts our specialness as humans and as children of God. And I don't think it does, but that's kind of the general impression that people have, that if it is random chance, and it, in fact, I have to tell you. So I don't know if you've read A Series of Fortunate Events. It's Sean Carroll's new book. And I love Sean Carroll. He works at HHMI. He's actually my funder. So he's awesome. I love him. But this book, it's great. It goes through the whole, all the randomness that's involved in our lives and the fact that we even exist, from the randomness of where the meteorite hit in the Yucatan to wipe out the dinosaurs, to the randomness of the guanines that rotate in their forms to cause DNA mutation. It's fantastic. And he basically makes the case that it really can be all explained by randomness. But then he takes it one step too far. And he says, therefore, God's not needed. And I think, oh, dang it. That's one of the misconceptions that I fight against, right? That yeah, the process can be all random, but it doesn't say anything about whether God is involved or not. It doesn't say anything about that. And that's where I think that's the threat, right? He's perpetuating the threat that religious people feel, is that somehow evolution destroys God, whereas gravity doesn't destroy God. Meiosis doesn't.
It only destroys God of those that thought that God pulled the sun across the sky.
True.
So it does. This is why I would argue that it does,
Not for our church, I guess.
Right. No, not for ours, but
Yeah.
So science tends to do this. Science tends to explain things that we used to explain with some miraculous mythical story. And so some people push back because they say, well, science just keeps pushing God out of my life because it keeps explaining things that I used to believe in that used to be miraculous to me. What's your response to that?
So this is a classic God of the gaps, right? That my response is you're basing your faith on the wrong thing, right? You should not base your faith on the fact that science can't explain something. Like I just read someone's email the other day who was talking about how science hasn't yet explained the origin of life, right? We have great possible explanations, hypotheses from an RNA world to extraterrestrial to all kinds of things, right? We just don't have the evidence yet to support one over another. And so, but his response was, well, therefore, because we can't explain it, it must be God. And I'm not against saying God's amazing and did this. However, if that's what your testimony is based on, that God is the only one that can explain this, what happens when science does come and explain it? Then your faith disappears. And so it's better if you base your faith, if you have a different view of what God is in your life. You need to base your faith on the fact that you have felt God's presence in your life. You have felt promptings. You have had experience that's supernatural. So that's something I was talking about in my article, is that a lot of times the conflict comes when science is trying to make claims about the natural world, right? Because that's where science can weigh in. We've got evidence, and so we can weigh in. So you need to be careful about basing your faith on natural world stuff. And we know this from the scriptures, right? We learn this all the time, that the natural world, we want to be careful that we're not hung up on that. And so, so that would be my response, is don't base your faith on statements about the natural world. Base your faith on supernatural, which are feelings, promptings, science, spiritual evidence.
Yeah, great. I love that. What other things would you say to the audience who's going to listen to this? What else is there anything else you'd like to say that you kind of give your students or give whoever?
Be patient and be okay with uncertainty. That is another big thing I see amongst my students, amongst my children, amongst the church, is that we just have this desire to be so certain about everything that uncertainty scares us. And it stems back to, having your little 8-year-old go up to the pulpit and say, I know this church is true, and I know the scriptures are true. And I'm thinking, no, you don't. Like, you believe they are because your parents have told you, and that's okay. But being like that, you have to know, or you're somehow falling down this slippery slope to losing your testimony, is a bad framework. We need to say, you know what, I believe based on what I've learned and what I've been told that this is true. And that's okay. But if something comes up that seems to contradict that, instead of saying, oh my gosh, if that's not true, then nothing is true, you need to be comfortable with being uncertain. And I think scientists are really good at this, because science is so uncertain. Things are changing all the time. And so the farther you get in science, the more comfortable I think we feel with uncertainty. And it's a skill to learn that. And I think that our students, and I tell them all the time, just be okay with just wait. And if you have to choose, if you feel the need to choose your faith, and then worry about getting more understanding of the science and of your faith. But don't leave the faith because something is scary or uncertain, because it'll all become clear eventually. It all works. You just need time to figure it out. So that skill is a necessary skill.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. If there's anything else, I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you've balanced your life? I think my wife is also a full-time, doctor, and she is gone a lot and trying to balance what women do in the professional world relative to the church. Do you want to say anything on that, or save that for a different time?
Sure. I mean, it's been rough. I'm not going to lie. Like I had my first baby at the end of my master's degree. And it was like planned, okay, we're going to start a family. But then I decided I wanted to do a PhD. And so I started my PhD with a 4-month-old, and then we surprisingly got pregnant. It was not quite planned. And Love you, Cash, if you ever watch this. We're happy to have you. But it was not quite planned. And it was really, I was at Arizona State and I got a lot of flack from a lot of people that I was having another baby. And so that was rough, but I pushed through it. My husband and I traded off a lot. We tried to get family only to help us. I actually got pregnant with my third when I should have been finishing my dissertation. And then I had a major computer mishap and my hard drive got ruined and I lost my entire dissertation and all of my data. And so my son was 8 months old when I graduated finally. And so endurance, having a good partner has been the most important thing. So having a partner that supports me. I tried to quit multiple times, especially after that happened, and he wouldn't let me. And I'm really grateful that he didn't. Now, taking the faculty position, it's great. There's a lot of flexibility, but I am gone. I mean, I'm gone every day from 8 to 5, if not longer. And sometimes that's been really hard. And my husband works, he's just finished working out of town. So he'd be gone for 3 to 9 months at a time, solid. And I would be a single mom doing all of this. And it has been a challenge. We've had really good help, really good live-in nannies that have been instrumental in that. But I think, it's a decision for you and your spouse and the Lord, but having a supportive spouse is incredible. And it's important.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as I've gotten to know you, I've just admired your career, the things that you've done and the things that you're doing. We've been able to publish together, and that for me has been great. And so I just hope a lot of other young women are, watch this and look at you as maybe a role model too. That
you do it.
These things can be done, and so I really appreciate that. Well, Jamie, I am so thankful that you spent this time to talk to me today, and I think you've said some great things. I hope that people really listen to what you said, and I think this will be one of those interviews that will be well watched here on Accept Truth with Joy.
Yeah, please reach out, talk to me if you have questions.
Okay, yeah.
So.
All right, thank you again.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Sunshine with me. The doors are open, the skies are too. Sunshine is coming in for me and you. Sunshine.